and I can say their names. So the director, Gabrielle, Zilkha, and Ouaknine.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming in the middle of the day.
Yes, thank you. We're so happy to be here at the largest and longest film festivals, and we hope you enjoy our fun documentary filled with heart and lots of laughs.
And directed, written, edited, produced, and DOP'd by queer women.
And then Angelica who you will see in the film. Come on, this is Candy we're talking about. And now you can watch the documentary.
And one more note, there will be a panel following the film with the director and the producer, Angelica, and it will be moderated by journalist Jude. So please stay afterwards. It'll be a fun, amazing talk. See you after the film.
Thank you, Farida. Thank you, everyone. I guess we'll have a seat. Wasn't that movie amazing, you guys? I just love the part. I think it's so amazing that it's playing in San Francisco, because we now know that it was San Francisco Dykes who got Bette and Tina back together. Right?
That story.
I mean, you guys can lay claim to that, so I don't know if we have L-Word fans in the crowd, but... So congratulations to all of you on this film. It's really so fascinating and funny, and like, I was just watching it and myself feeling seen of, you know, not that, you know, these are people that I feel that I know, and just even the fact that you made this film, right, is validating of this culture, right? And it's like, I wouldn't think that someone would make a film about them, you know? But then it's like, it's amazing, and it's so interesting and really important. So yeah, Gabrielle, why don't we start with you and talk about how did you sort of fall into this subject matter, and when did you start working on the project as well?
I'm not in the fandom culture. I wasn't, and I know Steph, and Steph was there was a Shastra was looking at potentially doing a documentary around the creation of the Carmilla web series, because it is kind of a really fun story of like this tiny thing that just blew up because of fandom. And I met with Steph, and she kind of mentioned, like, I think there's a bigger story there. And she's like, have you heard of Lexicon? And I'm like, is that a medication? She's like, no, like the ship between Plex. And I'm like a boat? And so I was just really not into this. And then Steph basically just sat me down for like a 3-hour meeting and told me everything. And I was like, this is the most fascinating world I've ever heard about.
And to go there 3 weeks later to shoot.
Yeah, and then we had to go very quickly to Lexicon. And I guess like I've always been I've always cared passionately about representation in media. But when I didn't see myself represented in TV, I kind of withdrew. I got kind of resentful of television and pop culture and popular media, and looked elsewhere into subcultures. It was really nice to see people who leaned in, who really just really kept advocating and saying, this isn't good enough, and we're saying it because we love it and we want it to change. And so my interest is really through the activism route, but loved discovering the fandom aspect. It was just so much fun.
Angelica, so nice to have you here. Thank you for being here. I think you're still shooting Pose, right? You guys are still shooting?
Season 3!
Yeah. Just got picked up for season 3. Yeah. But many people here might know you before Pose from Her Story. If you guys haven't seen it, it's an amazing web series that got Emmy nominated, and So were you familiar with the kind of frenetic lesbian queer fandom from that, I assume?
Yes. It actually was her story where I found out, and the funny thing was last year after season 1 had premiered Pose, I was in New York City and just, I don't know, just out in Times Square. And this couple stops me, these two folks stop me, and they're like, oh my God, are you Angelica Ross from Her Story? And I'm like, yes. And they were from Puerto Rico, visiting New York. So that's how I knew that something as small as Her Story, which was a web series, that also brought this love story between a white trans woman who was struggling with her feelings of identifying as a lesbian or as bi, when it kind of just, being trans, there's some other layers of things that you have to kind of work through, but it was one of those situations between her and this other main character, another white lesbian character on the show, where instead of just thinking, well, this person is trans, that would make her lesbian, the audience is sitting there like, kiss already, kiss already. So when we were talking about that whole shipping, I was like, oh yeah, that's what was going on our show.
I guess I want to ask each of you about your own personal moments. What are your cultural moments? Because when I was watching, I could definitely relate to Reese talking about the L word and just feeling seen for the first time. And that I always I rate like lesbian movies on whether or not I get like butterflies in my stomach, right? That's how you know it's usually made by a woman or at least a gay person. But I'm curious, Angelica, I mean, what are your first memories of like seeing yourself on screen?
Well, as a Black trans woman, that's really hard to say. That's only been more recent. I will say that there was one time where it was kind of close when Kerry Washington played a trans woman in Hot and Cracktown. It was a movie that was on Netflix, and it was a while ago. And I remember being so taken back because it seemed so real. Like, she seemed so real with her inflections, with everything, and come to find out, one of the girls we knew in the community was a consultant on the film, and so we worked with Kerry Washington very closely to create that character. But then it wasn't until like Her Story and like doing Her Story, and I felt this weight because of the Emmy nominations. You had producers who were they were part of the Emmy voting block. So producers from like Orange is the New Black and all these other shows now voting to be seen. And so you could feel the thunder of our voices as trans people saying we don't want to be portrayed by men anymore. We don't want to be portrayed by folks who are not trans. We want to tell our own stories. And I remember doing a scene in Her Story, and we were filming it, and we didn't make it into the cut, but there was a moment where the main character is asking Paige, she's asking, okay, well the date sounded like it was great, so why do you sound like so bummed out? And she's like, well, I didn't tell him, I didn't just disclose and tell him that I was trans. And she says this line, well, I just wanted to be a girl on a date. And so after like, I don't know how many takes of that, I just lost it and started crying, and I was a puddle of tears because it actually hit me even harder than the character, that what that experience is like. And then I knew in that instant how powerful the story was going to be because of how much real, authentic representation was happening there.
Do you guys want to answer it? When was the first time you saw yourselves on screen or felt that moment of recognition?
And just as a caveat, like just even in the time that I interview you to now, just how much has progressed in terms of like that, I'm hoping that wouldn't happen again with like a Kerry Washington playing a cis character, person playing like a trans character. But in terms of, myself, I think I think the L word made the biggest mark. I remember seeing Kissing Jessica Stein.
It's really underrated. People don't like that movie because she ends up with a man, but it's such a good movie.
It's very, But I also remember seeing that ending, and it felt like every ending I saw was like one of them has to become straight again. And so that was frustrating. Then the L word, like it was just like, oh, we can be kind of cool. So I became a lesbian, but not that cool.
I don't know about seeing myself, but I distinctly remember that reading Lila and Fred fanfic during Angel. I was like, wow, that made me gay. It's like, woo!
Yeah.
So definitely. And then Lila and Fred, it was like, she was the bossy, dominating one, and Fred was like this naive girl. And I was like, yeah, they gotta fuck. And then I read it. Sorry. Yeah, and then I definitely gravitated towards shows that had, lesbian subtext, because the reality is the queer characters that were queer on the shows up until recently were kind of on the margins, or side gays, as I call them. So when there was Xena and Gabrielle and they were at the center of the narrative, that's when I became really invested, because there was also a long, slow burn, and I'm a big fan of that. That's what we tried to do in Carmilla as well, take people at two extremes and then make them want to kiss at the end of the season. So basically, I, like Britta, am a fangirl who then ventured on the other side. I'm here to spread the gay agenda.
So as the resident self-proclaimed fangirl on stage, I mean, I guess you obviously made this film, in order to see yourself on screen, right? And like often I think we become creators because we want to see ourselves. So I guess, yeah, and in Carmilla as well. Yeah, how has that been for you as a queer creator to like step into the realm of being like, I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna make the thing that I want to see and put myself up there?
I think it was really important for us not to make this a subculture doc. Like, it's not, look at those weirdos in the corner talking about shows, and really frame it and how fandom connects to intersectionality, which connects to representation. And this has different layers. It's not the same thing as, men going crazy because Star Wars was female characters. That's a different side of fandom. This one's definitely connected to identity. And as Flourish was saying, you see yourself in parts of these characters, and you learn about yourself through those stories. It's almost easier in some way. So I think not making it a kind of voyeuristic subculture doc is really important to us. And what was fun is that both our editor, me, and Gabrielle all came at fandom from different angles. So we were able to say, like, I remember the Lexa debacle, and I was like, oh, you should look at this tweet because they said this, and then it was so weird, And we also had those conversations where, for instance, I wish we had Jamie Clayton from Sense8, because that's one of the few kind of trans female characters that's also queer in a relationship with a woman on screen and has a dedicated fandom. Because sometimes what's unfortunate is that the shows with really accurate rep don't have the same fanish interest. So, here's some more shows like that can really have all those elements together. And sci-fi often does that, so that's another interesting point.
I'm curious, Angelica, have you experienced do you have any funny stories with your own fans? I mean, can fans ever go overboard and
Yes.
you can feel free to say anything?
Yes. There's a lot going on. My DMs have a lot of things going on in there. I get pictures. Some great. But I will say that the fandom is really interesting. I have to keep putting myself in a place to remind myself why we're doing this and who we're doing it for. And so many times when I'm at places, even though, we work 18-hour days filming, it's just, there's so much that goes along with being an actor and doing all that people don't see, and so then when you're in front of people, you still have to remember, like, they're emotionally invested, and we're changing people's families, and like giving people hope. So, it's hard sometimes to stand in front of someone as they're like breaking into tears, and they're, like the girl in the, she's so nervous, and I try to hold space. It's hard, but I try to do my best to hold space for fans. And, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, they're apologizing. I'm sorry, you don't have to apologize, it's okay. Like, you just give them time. But yeah, nothing like really bad. The one thing I will say is like being on the show that is rooted in so much activism, and the show itself is a piece of activism. As celebrities or as folks on the show, both the visibility for trans women of color has been great, but it's also been something that's brought more violence and more vulnerability with the visibility, and so that it also does that for us as well, you know, as actors, and that people don't really see. And so my face being behind this, the calls and this character and this storyline, I'm still walking down the street, and sometimes I'm recognized as from the show, and sometimes I'm just a black trans woman walking down the street that still has to deal with misogyny and still has to deal with those things. So it's not easy being in the seat of the representation, because there's so much that's put on it, both from your fans and from your folks. But I think that we're all of the people, Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, myself, India Moore, Haley Sahar, like Ryan Jamal Swain, like if you just name all these folks, you'll realize that all these folks are actually prepared for this time, for this representation, and they're prepared to not only do the work on camera, but also to do the work off. Okay, off of it.
I really love what Stephen Canals, who's the executive producer of Pose, said in the film about, they made the active choice not to, show the tragedy as much, to give people this sort of, alternate reality, right, and like this happy ending. And I guess, how do you all as creators think about the tropes and the harmful things that we've seen, and sort of in your writing or your performance, like how aware are you of trying to change those things when you're making work?
Well, I think in the doc, like one of the hard things for me as a director and for my editor, my floor editor, it was connecting some of the shows that we wanted to highlight, like Pose for its representation, with this side of fandom that's like obsessed with like queer representation, but it was shit, and it was very narrow. And we felt that the best way to do that was like looking at the mechanics of representation. That's where we wanted to talk to Angelica and Pose, because Angelica is also a creator as well as an activist and a performer. And we wanted to dissect, okay, what are the ingredients for good representation? And again and again, it's people leading their own stories, empowering the very people to take those narratives and decide, even if it does, like Stephen says, go against what might be realistic, or and not treating anyone with kid gloves, but to decide we're going to make this narrative different, to carve out a new path for people to conceive of like a trans woman of color or a lesbian superhero or anything. So for us, like the where we place those shows in the doc was a way to say, like, this is where this needs to go. We need to have more people who've been on the margins represented by the majority to represent themselves.
I will say though, I thought when I looked and saw him say that, I was like, uh-oh, well that's old, because that was first season. Which I feel like first season, I must spill a little tea, but I feel like first season was this rose-colored glass look at, the community, even though you did go through the ups and downs. This season, they ripped those glasses off and stomped them. So we're only 2 episodes in, and you're already getting the feel of what
you mean like from the narrative.
The tone has totally,
Yes,
And but we also know there's a responsibility to tell more authentic stories, but at least, even with the cattiness that happens between the characters, there's some things that are said that are inappropriate and all these things, but we want to be authentic about the community. And so when you have people behind the scenes directing and writing, it makes sure that we can still talk about this, but in a way that feels respectful, that for all of us that are actually a part of the community.
You've earned people's trust by that point.
And out of curiosity, would you feel like you could have only gone to this place in the second season because the first season had that radical optimism, It's different than starting right off the bat with torture porn.
Yes. Yeah. How about you, Steph, with Carmilla? I mean, how much did that inform?
Reality, lesbian vampires, non-binary. There's this, one of my favorite exchanges is...
lesbian vampire.
Yeah, exactly. It happened on the Elmer too. But one of my favorite exchanges in the 3rd season is where the father of the main character is like learning about the pronouns of the non-binary character. And they're saying, we're dealing with the end of the world, so really, like, pronouns are not an issue, and I love that because they're dealing with that rather than the intricacies of why be angry at someone else's identity. So I think radical optimism is something I definitely believe in, as well as earnestness. And I think what I love about fanish attitudes and fandom is that there is a kind of love of loving, and you don't have to be sarcastic or, play it cool. You can really just love with abandon, and that's really refreshing, and I think we kind of need that these days.
One of my favorite lines is the person who says, "I can be a whole nerd and it's okay."
As opposed to like an eighth of a nerd. That's really, and I loved her like encompassing of the whole nerd.
I wanted to ask about the title and get a little bit into the language politics of using the word queer and queer women, because to me, like, I was watching it and I was like, lesbians be crazy. Like, that's what I was thinking of. This is a very queer woman and non-binary, like, phenomenon, right? Like, gay male fans are not quite as fervent as this fandom. And I think it was really smart of you to, open it up and use the word queer, but I'm just curious if, like, were there interviews where you had to go back and have the person say queer women instead of lesbian, or it seemed very deliberate?
Yeah, I think, so lesbian to me is an identity, and queer is, but it feels like it has this political undertone. Like queering, or to queer is to, I think, own that difference, embrace it, and then and push it, which is why, you can have, there are shows that I would literally catch myself saying, it's a gay show. Not a queer show, but it's gay. It does something that just twists the expectations a little bit. So what I wanted to show with the title, which, up until the last minute, we were like, this title is too insider baseball, we can't use this, and then we just found it worked. Because we liked how fans and industry were both actively queering things. I struggled a lot, and I felt very, a lot of pressure to try and reach all the letters of our beautiful community in the doc. And I got lost sometimes, but I felt that the story that really was told, especially through this Lexa narrative, and the Twitter activism and all that, and the story I could tell authentically was that of the queer women. But I didn't want it to end there, but I knew that, then I lost it sometimes, but I knew that had to be, that was really the story that we had in the footage.
The casting is really incredible. You found some great characters and so many funny people.
We're lucky. We just reached out to people like Angelica. We're like, would you do this? And then it was yes. We're like, oh my god.
Thank you.
I guess, but from the fan casting, how did you choose those? There must be so many eager people and great characters in that community. How did you choose? And you did a great job. I think you didn't get into the weeds. You did a really good job representing the community. And just the different bodies on screen. I love seeing different kinds of bodies on screen. And
yeah, we were very conscious in a very, when we went to, Becca was this random person that was at ClexCon, and my field producer, Kirsta, was just you've got to meet this girl and her grandmother. I'm like, who's on her time? I'm trying to fill this person. And she's like, you've got to meet her. And she just waited around for an hour. Then we just turned the camera on her, and then I saw her grandmother with the Grandma's Gone Wild shirt, and I was like, I need you to be the star. And, but a lot, Steph just hooked us up with all the fans.
Yeah, it kind of helps that through Carmilla and beforehand I'm part of that community, so people would trust me more because I'm in fandom. I'm not there to make fun of them in a way. It's really out of a sense of communal celebration. And the other thing is that we really only had less than 10 days to shoot this entire doc. So we were there at Flexicon. Yeah. Wow, this budget is tiny. Props to Gabrielle here for being crazy together. Yeah. And we really had those 3 days at Flexicon to get all that footage. In an ideal world, it would have been great to kind of follow Becca and go to her home in Pennsylvania and whatnot. But it really did help that we had, about a year to make this, because we did it in partnership with a Canadian broadcaster. And then a couple days in LA to get Eileen and Angelica and Stephen and all that.
10 days total over a year.
I'd say even less.
Even less, I think.
Yeah.
3 at Flexicon, 3 in LA.
And And what about the Z-Night?
So the Z-Night retreat was a last minute thing. That was never going to happen. It wasn't in the budget. And we found out about it. I'm like, there is a camp for Xena fans. Like, we need to go to this immediately. And Steph was like, I don't know, like we could probably just talk to someone. And then Alex, the other producer, was like, we're not sending this bitch to Xena camp. And then I was like, here's why this will make an amazing
well.
scene. And I was like, so my cousin, who was in the audience, was my PA sidekick for the day. And I flew in, I had a wedding like the next day. We flew in, I was literally there for 3 hours and like just caught like what I felt like was like my favorite part of the documentary.
Oh yeah, no, I love it.
Just put your war paint on and...
There you go. I just got my little war cry and found my
And Natalie went back this year. I definitely want to go next year.
That was amazing. I did not know that existed. I'm very happy to know that it does. So I think we have time for some questions from the audience. We have a very eager hand back here.
So, question, what is your sense of the industry right now, I guess mostly television industry, for execs? I mean, do they still perceive these shows as being career shows for their audiences, or can they envision that these shows might attract your audience as well? I mean, they still take shows.
Oh boy, I got so much to talk about there. I think it's the blessing and the curse of being called niche, because we can say that fans will show up, will over-index on social media. There's definitely like people will buy, and you know they'll show up. But at the same time, there's this pressure to have to appeal to everyone. So whenever I'm pitching something queer, you always have to lead with the universal angle. Even when you don't think it's that important, you just have to convince them it's universal. Don't worry. And I think that definitely helps. But we're definitely not there yet. I think it'll be slow but steady progress. And that's why we have, Angelica making her own shows as well.
Do you find that you're still like pitching, even now that you have some star power behind you, are you still having to make that, like, first of all, educate funders or people you're pitching to, or like make it relatable, or?
Well, here's the thing. Like the same thing with her story, and as well as with King Esther, which if you've got time, you'll be screening later today. With projects like that, I've learned to collaborate with folks who are around you. And instead of trying always to reach these folks and try to get them to believe in your narrative or believe in your little engine that could, it's really looking around you and seeing who's doing the work right now, who are interesting storytellers, and who has the lens and the perspective, and who's shooting things pretty cool. And then just doing things so cool that they want to be a part of it. So that's what happened with her story, is that even though we didn't get picked up and made, Hollywood wanted to be part of that in a way where they sort of broke us apart, where, you got Jen Richards, who is doing things on shows. You got me, who is doing things on shows, because a lot of times what Hollywood wants to do is they want to try to recreate what you can create and not necessarily fund the magic that was all of these queer women working together. So that is still hard, but I do feel that, like with Janet Mock getting her deal at Netflix, making history. We got folks like Rain Valdez with Raising Thomas. Rain Valdez, that's my sister, let me just tell you. Rain, stand up for a second, just wait for the folks. Yes. Raising Tongue premiered last night, and it was one of these things that when I was in Los Angeles, we started, we were doing like an acting thing in my living room. And it would be you, Jen Richards, and we just kept inviting people, Blossom, folks just started coming out. And it was like, she was like, well, I think I should do something with this. And she created a group for trans, and really all actors, but a group where trans people can feel comfortable learning and just learning the skills and getting ready for these bigger opportunities and creating shorts and things outside that. So we are circling all the festivals. We're not waiting for someone to give us the green light. I think that's what's really important, because that's how we're forcing the hand. That's how we'll eventually force it.
And one thing that I hope we continue to see is that there's not one show that is the definite representation for that community. You want to see multiple poses. I want to see One Day at a Time, unfortunately that's still in the bubble, and Vida coexist, and they're both doing different things for the queer Latinx community, and that's what's exciting. So here's some more of the same views. We have a question over here.
So question, so I'm from Western Wisconsin University.
I'm from Racine, Wisconsin. Where are you from?
Eau Claire.
Eau Claire? I know Eau Claire, girl!
There are 12 of us from Eau Claire sourcing for our film festival that'll be in the fall. But my question is, what is like one of the major things you would like to see a 20-year-old audience take away from this film?
A 20-year-old audience?
Yep.
I think they're on their phones. Well, there's two things. This is a really interesting question. I want some of these 20-year-old audiences to see the history they're a part of. I would interview, like when I was interviewing Latinx geeks, I remember them just kind of talking about the L word, like, oh my God, that was so stupid. I was like, you don't know what we had. Like, we had nothing. And we had subtext. We had like, and so I think that we took time in the doc to really focus on like, you know, this grasping at any kind of like, you know, romantic look between people because we just didn't have it. So I want people to know where we've come from as queer folks who love to consume media. I also think, you know, this was a little bit of a nudge in the fandom community that, like, as someone who's a fandom adjacent and coming into it, is saying, like, look, if you're cheering for representation, you gotta cheer for all kinds of representation and not just for pretty women, because like you need to like use that same fervor to like save those shows that are out there and use your fandom as activism because it's working. I think it's working.
I would also say, in answer to that question, when we talk about the power of fandom and their power to like sort of reach creators and have them sort of change things that they were doing, then when I saw, because I really didn't know about all this stuff about the fandom, so when I saw like these scripts and things that folks had created to further this narrative that they wanted, I was like, hold up, like, so the 20-year-olds, the folks that are there, I want them to see beyond that, to see that, wait a minute, you just created a show.
Yeah. You can create it yourself. Yeah.
And so you can, again, look around the folks that are around you and do like Issa Rae and create Awkward Black Girl for YouTube, and all of a sudden you've got a show on HBO.
Yeah, absolutely.
Create it where you can't see it.
And also look at people like Britta who started in fandom reading Mulder Krychek fan fiction and now are writing and working on
Exactly.
Other questions? Yes, in there.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank you for mentioning bisexual characters in that.
Hey, bisexual.
The B is usually invisible in LGBT, and I've seen this so many times. There was a New York Times article by a friend of mine, and he named all these great moments in history that we usually don't know, but we don't really know anything about bisexual history, and there is some, and so I appreciate you mentioning that, and I don't know if there's anything more in the works you can tell us about, but that's something that really bugs me, that this always gets left out or degraded, and it's still okay to, you know, make fun of bisexuals in the queer community and to put us down, so thank you.
Yeah, when we were doing this, I think Shelley, my editor, and I were looking at, and we're like, there's some really bad bisexual representation out there. Like, we looked at like all of the stuff when we were compiling that trope section, where they go through all the different lesbian tropes and bisexual tropes. That used to be like 5 minutes. We shrunk it down. And some of the ones for bisexuality on TV are awful. I really hope that, you know, changes. I also think that the emergence of the term queer has helped erase like the need to sort of define those things. So bisexuals, yeah, and pansexual has actually like helped us elevate and not even think about the sort of binaries around sexuality.
And I think Vida season 2
Yes.
on Stars does a really good job kind of having these conversations with different queer people,
they
talking
do.
about how, you know, there is a difference in what they want to see.
In the center in the back.
Great.
Hi. Thanks so much for making this documentary and for conveying the humanity that comes through in your film. My question is about distributing, or how's the documentary going to be seen?
That's a great question. Like I mentioned, we have in Canada, we did this in partnership with a network called Hollywood Suite. So they have the SVOD and the broadcast in that territory. So we're currently looking, if anyone here is from Netflix or Hulu, we're looking for an all rights SVOD deal outside of Canada. And hopefully what we did with Carmela was really be able to reach a global audience with them buying it directly. I think this, because it's an explanation and journey through fandom, it would benefit from being on kind of an easily accessible platform that people have as part of their media diet. So hopefully we'll see that happen.
But also it helps, we don't really have a marketing budget. So if you could just tweet about it, tell your friends, that's how we can get people to show the desire to one place.
One of my favorite things was someone at Inside Out in Toronto said, I think she was from Finland, she was like, I need to send this to our broadcasters so they understand when I'm pitching queer shows, they understand this history and they have it when they're evaluating projects. And I found that so validating and great, because a lot of the showrunners we interviewed didn't know about the tropes. And it's only after, talking about it that they're like, oh, now we know, and we don't want a shitstorm on our hands, so we will not do that.
It is an interesting question, though. I mean, I guess there's so much content now, so many people looking for content. It's both, we have more queer shows than ever, but at the same time, the audiences are more disparate than ever, right? So how do you all, as creators, how do you think that's affecting, what's being made, what's getting given money, distribution? How does online, say, compare to a platform like FX? What do you gain, what do you lose from doing it those ways? And how would you sort of advise young creators to approach the industry?
Well, I don't have a TV show yet, so I'm not really sure I should advise anyone.
One thing I often say, like you mentioned with Awkward Black Girl, there was something so simple in how she did those first few episodes. I remember the scene, she's walking down the hallway and she's just thinking in her mind about what she's going to say to her coworker, and it was done so simply. Carmilla, that you saw there for a second, all 3 seasons were shot in a single angle vlog, because our model was to kind of emulate what YouTube looked like with those direct-to-camera vlogs. So really, I would say, think about what platform your content is going on and make it work for that platform. And then there's the long, hard slog of knocking on people's doors and saying hey, you like Xena, you might like this. And don't presume to like it, just introduce it. And that is definitely a part of, the audience won't come to you. You have to go seek them out and convince them that your show is worth their time.
But it's also allowed that not being on a mainstream, what Reese was sort of saying in the doc was this notion of everyone, you don't need people around a dinner table watching TV and to appeal to that whole family. You can have people in the dorm room or on the bus or watching on their phone. There can be a community that's made of millions of disparate people, and that's how I think web series have really paved the way for new interesting stories, because they were stories from the margins. They're way more interesting than the dominant narratives we've been seeing. But it's proof that there is collectively just people everywhere watching these shows and then finding community around the shows.
And really ask yourself, does this need to exist and why?
And I think also what's really also very problematic about the whole thing is the same way when we deal with trying to do policies, and let's say you have a national, I'm trying to ice skate here for a second, but you have a national, social justice organization that's trying to move some particular issue forward, then they want to find someone who is a good face for that issue, who's commercially viable or acceptable, and so that's kind of what sort of happens too when you're trying to push queer and LGBT stories. You still get someone who's the most mainstream attractive around that. That's why those of you that are going to get to see King Esther, one thing I love about King Esther, and I love about Rowan, who is our main actress, a Black trans woman, is that she, when you see it, she is obviously a star. But I would say on bigger network platforms or what have you, she wouldn't normally be cast as the leading lady. But I definitely could see, on networks like Star, where they have shows like Power and very urban shows or whatnot, I could see her leading in those spaces. But like you said, so you have to sort of think about what network spaces are trying to tell stories that are a little different. Even if it's like, even the newer networks that are popping up that sometimes do reality-based TV shows that do reality shows on communities that they're finding, I feel like there might be, this is me thinking forward, but I think that there might be a space there where reality TV show is dominating on a certain network to then create a scripted show of the diversity that's available.
Yeah, and
And again, I think the film does a really good job of showing lots of different people. And I was glad that you went there with the discussion of like, oh, we're looking up at the stage and there's all these thin white femmes.
That really baffled me as like a person walking into it. Because like I said, I looked at representation and like, it's hard to like try to be a pretty girl. Like it's a hard life sometimes.
It always.
You do it so well.
Glue and tape.
You make it look very easy and
Paint. Yeah.
So like sometimes it's not refreshing to see gorgeous people, I would say, even if they are quote unquote representing a minority. A little bit of I can relate to what you're saying with King Esther. Like it's nice to see people that are people. And I found that a little frustrating in the fandom, but I also totally understand where they're coming from. Like they don't, it was, when I brought up that question a lot, it was like, we don't necessarily want to see just like the perfect representation. We want representation on our shows. Like my fun shows include superheroes or include pretty girls or whatever it was. So I got that. They wanted it to fit into what they
And
love.
there's something aspirational, it's sometimes I think we talk a lot about wanting to see ourselves, but I'd say a large majority of fans and fans want to see the aspirational version of themselves, like the super hot androgynous person.
Well, even with that aspirational thing, one thing that I hope that I as an actor can help to bring to some stories is that being a pretty girl, sometimes I try to communicate to folks as well, is like, I'm only the pretty girl because I learned over a long time how to work the lighting, the smoke, the mirrors, the shadow, this and that, or what have you. So, but when I'm not wearing all of that, the way that I'm treated and just walking down as a Black woman in America, like I know what that's like. I know what that feels like. I know. So I would love to see those stories where people understand that in this world, like we're kind of all mannequins, like I guess RuPaul's saying, we're all born naked and the rest is drag sort of situation. It really is about how good you get at your drag. And so, yes, there's some privilege that comes with pretty privilege and passive privilege and all these things or whatever, but at the end of the day, honey, it's drag. And I am literally working with, like any woman in this world is working to put on drag to walk outside the house.
Did anyone else have questions while that? Yes, over there. Wait till you get a microphone. Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to start saying it's a fantastic film. Steph, it's Lisa from Mardi Gras Film Festival in Sydney. Hello. I just wanted to ask, obviously, this is a thing that is about fandom, about television. And you're obviously, this film is just screened at a film festival, and I'm a programmer for a film festival, and I wanted to see, my festival, we screened the Camilla movie, and we had Natasha Negavamas as a guest. We also screened the film that Lisa and Natasha made together a few years ago, and we had Lisa as a guest, and we had like a mini Klexicon. We've had a meet and greet with them there, and it was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had as a festival programmer, to see all of these young queer people coming to the film festivals, because they generally don't. So I just wanted to ask what you think us as film festivals can do to try and attract that fandom? Because it's a struggle.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you have the answer right there, in that it's bridging the divide between creators and fandom, and seeing them as more one and the same. Lexicon also runs a web series workshop in LA where they encourage fan people to come pitch their own career stories and kind of bridge that gap between Spanish creation, because these people are writing, they're drawing, like they're making comics that look as good as anything that's out there, you know? So any type of industry initiative that's aimed at fandom, I think would be really interesting. Whether it's panels like this, whether it's pitching workshops, whether it's just a discussion of fandom, because the other thing is that fandom is often looked down upon. We're looked at weirdos in the corner, and this is not real art, right? Because you're basing it off someone else's IP. So I think validating fandom is a big part of Lexicon, and that's something also film festivals can continue in that direction.
I think also, like, one of the things we see with a lot of Black creators and communities when we get certain films that come out and we want to show the support is that we know is how important it is to get certain fans in the seats to be able to see this, Black children or what have you. We're buying out the theaters, or we're buying out, half the theaters or whatnot. So with some of these festivals and some of these shows that you know are going to create or attract a certain fandom, I think it might be a good idea to reserve certain seats or access for those who wouldn't normally have access.
Go see more movies at Frameline. Thank you, San Francisco. Thank you, Angelica, Gabrielle, and Steph. Hearing the script, tell everyone about it. Do you have another showing? Is there another showing? Another showing at Outfest, so tell your friends in LA. Thank you all.
Thank you.